You can detect the infrared spectrum? I can smell them. Ozone.
No doubt now who the imposter is. Only the real thing could do that with the Billy Club. Catch you later. I've got to check on our friend.
Kid, the day you catch me singing Jingle Bells is the day pigs fly.
Aw, come on.
Not exactly high-tech, but hey, be unawares. Was it my breath? You primrose popinjay!
Better get ready, Glory Boy. Here goes nothing.
Oliver Osnick was a bit of a fanboy for Dr. Octopus. I mean, I don't really see why you would see this supervillain as a role model, but I digress. Anyway, Ollie wanted to be Doc Ock's sidekick, so he made these metal tentacles to impress him. But surprise, surprise, he eventually found out that Doc Ock wasn't exactly a role model worth following. That's where Spidey swooped in to save the day. Spider-Man showed him the ropes, and Ollie had a change of heart. He redesigned those tentacles into legs, and bam, the Steel Spider was born. He tried the hero gig for a bit, but life eventually got a bit too complicated. He hung up his super cape, should I say his metallic legs, for a while, hit the books at college, but then he came back during the whole Civil War debacle. Now, here's the kicker. Venom eventually would go on to bite his arm off, which was pretty rough. After that, things got hazy. Last we knew, he got caught up in the Superhuman Registration Act mess and ended up in medical prison. Poor guy just trying to do good, but got tangled up in a whole web of complications. At number 9 is Yuri Watanabe's Wraith. Yuri Watanabe used to work for the NYPD and was literally the only cop who had Spidey's back, while the rest of the entire task force weren't too keen on the web slinger. She and Spidey were doing alright as a duo until the supervillain named Massacre showed up. Tried as they might, they couldn't stop his rampage in time, and this failure led to Yuri getting the boot from the case, and she wasn't too happy about it, to say the least. So what does she do? She reinvents herself as Wraith. No cape, no superpowers, just her brains, her detective skills, and some nifty little gadgets to help her take down the bad guys on her own terms. Now, Spider-Man wasn't completely on board with her solo gig, given her total lack of powers and whatnot. But when push came to shove, they did team up to tackle Mr. Negative. Now, even though Yuri was included in Insomniac's Spider-Man game, many fans still don't think that that minor appearance did the character true justice, so we're hoping that changes in the future. If you're enjoying the video so far, please take a second to support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 are the Brooklyn Avengers. These guys got their powers in the most bizarre way possible, thanks to their landlord and some radioactive bedbug spray. Yeah, imagine that. They're like the accidental superheroes of Brooklyn. So back in the day when Peter Parker was still a budding superhero, he teamed up with this crew, which included Psi and Phi, two telekinetic brothers, the Hipster, that's Hipst with an apostrophe R, pretty cool, who's an old dude who could hypnotize people, Paintball, who could generate paint bursts, kind of like a weaker version of Squid Kid from Splatoon. We also got Boilermaker, who's an intuitive machinist, Mints, who could charge candies into weapons, and Rotary, who could spin any object around. Yeah, seems like some of these guys will be short end of the stick when it comes to their powers. Now, even despite some of these powers being still a little lame, Spidey still managed to learn some cool moves from them, skills that would actually come in handy later on in his crime-fighting escapades. Now, fast forward a bit, and things took a turn for the worst for this superhero team. Someone starts knocking off these Brooklyn Avengers one by one. Spider-Man, being the good guy he is, jumps back in to help out his pals. You know how these superhero stories go, there's all kinds of chaos. Their whole apartment building eventually got wrecked in the process. Despite the setback, these Brooklyn Avengers are resilient. They decide to stick around and help keep their neighborhood safe, even though they haven't made a comeback in Marvel Comics ever since. Who knows, maybe someday they'll swing back into action. At number 7 are the Slingers. So the origins for this one is a bit crazy, as Spider-Man got into some trouble he didn't ask for when he was framed for a crime he didn't commit. Thanks a lot, Norman Osborn. To clear his name, Spidey came up with 4 new superhero identities and rocked these 4 unique cool costumes. But once the mess was sorted out, he ditched those personas and went back to being your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Now here's where the plot thickens. You see, Black Marvel, an old retired hero, got his hands on those snazzy outfits and decided to hand them to 4 college kids. These young guns put on those suits and boom! One day you're a regular student and the next you're rocking a superhero suit fighting crime. These teens became the group known as the Slingers. Led by Prodigy, an expert freestyle wrestler with boosted strength thanks to his super suit, his team of Slingers also includes Dusk, who rocks a suit made from antimatter in the negative zone, which allows her to teleport, manipulate dark force energy, and she's also clairvoyant. Then there's the Hornet, a genius inventor slash expert in all things hard and software slash Olympic level athlete who actually had made his own Prowler suit first before being given the Hornet wing. And lastly there's Ricochet, who has superhuman agility and who can chuck discs that deliver incredible force that also may explode on impact. The former monikers of Peter Parker may not be as famous as Spider-Man, but they're out there making a difference one sling at a time. At number 6 is Solo. Solo is a lesser known ally of Spider-Man in the Marvel comic universe, whose name is actually James Bourne, a military man betrayed by his own team who transformed into Solo, a guy who's all about hunting down terrorists and bad guys. He's got this cool thing going on where he can also teleport, which definitely sets him apart from your average crime-fighting crew. Now, Solo doesn't always see eye to eye with Spidey, especially since Solo doesn't mind ending people. Nevertheless, sometimes they've got to team up to tackle some big bads together, sort of like a good cop, bad cop duo, but with superpowers. They've faced off against some serious threats side by side, making for some pretty epic comic moments. Plus, Solo even had a stint with Deadpool's crew of not-so-heroic heroes, the Mercs for Money. But staying true to his calling, he went back to his solo gig, fighting crime his own way. At number 5 is Nightwatch. Nightwatch, who honestly looks like a knockoff Spawn, albeit, and dare I say, slightly cooler looking with his demonic skull-shaped insignia on his face. Anywho, in the far future, he holds the moniker of Night Eater, who repents and attempts to undo his image as a villain, and so he results to altering the past. Now taking on the heroic moniker of Nightwatch, he actually would eventually try to reset everything and escape his now heroic responsibilities, but he was dragged back into heroism once more to stop a dude who had stolen parts of his costume. Eventually, he'd team up with Spidey against Carnage's chaos in New York City, leading to Nightwatch getting offed by a pair of criminals during the Great Game comic arc, but thanks to some comic book logic, he managed to survive. Now, eventually, She-Hulk would unravel the truth about his alternate future as a villain, and the reformed hero now faces the music behind bars. At number 4 is El Muerto. So picture a whole family of luchador wrestlers passing down a mystical mask called El Muerto that gives them extra powers, which is basically the setup for Juan Carlos Estrada's story. Now, poor Juan gets handed this responsibility, but ends up flubbing it by losing in a fight against a villain named El Dorado. The consequence is that Juan's got to beat Spider-Man to get his groove back, but that plan flops too. But instead of being all, I'm the hero, you're the loser, Spidey's like, let's team up, because got some moves, bud. Together they take down El Dorado, and Spider-Man helps Juan find his path. After that, Juan kind of fades into the background, occasionally popping up in some storylines. Now, El Muerto might not be the headline act, but that team up with Spider-Man was a pretty neat moment for this underrated ally. Coming up third is Bluebird. Back when Peter Parker first got his powers, Sally was right there in his world. She was full of energy, always seeking thrills, which often landed her in trouble. One time, she stumbled into a showdown between Spider-Man and Electro, but it was at this moment when Sally decided to become a DIY hero, suiting up as Bluebird. However, she was more of a bother than a help to Spider-Man, not really listening to warnings to stay out of it. Sadly, her heroic stint ended tragically as she perished in a car crash. Later on, a clone of Sally would show up, but it's unclear if this one survived for real or vanished like the rest of the clone. At number 2 is Shoc. Shoc might not be the most famous Spider-Man buddy, but this guy deserves a little bit of spotlight. Todd Field's just a regular dude whose dad worked for the bad guys, but only because he had no choice. Todd's dad was trying to make a powerful suit that taps into some crazy dark force dimension. But tragedy struck when a villain named the Crown offed Todd's dad and yoinked the suit. Todd, fueled by revenge and determination, rebuilt the suit, becoming the electrifying hero Shoc. He and Spidey teamed up, taking down the Crown by overloading his suit. Now, Shoc would eventually get caught up in some bad stuff, get zombified by the Hand, and taken down. Luckily, Wolverine and the team at S.H.I.E.L.D. helped him out, fixing his now zombified mind. Since then, nobody knows where Shoc is, but man, he deserves more credit for his electrifying heroics. And at number 1 is Cardiac. Cardiac is a superhero who's kind of like the Punisher, but instead of taking down the Mafia, he's tackling the messed up healthcare system. So he's got a sick costume, cool gadgets, and a heart replaced by a fancy device called a beta particle reactor, which gives him powers that no regular human could have. Now, his origin story hits pretty hard. Elias Wortham, Cardiac's alter ego, lost his brother to an incurable disease. Motivated by tragedy tragedy, he studied medicine and ended up in a pharmaceutical company's board. But here's the kicker. This is where he discovered that the pharmaceutical company had actually hid a cure that could have saved his brother's life. Why? Because it wouldn't have made them as much money, obviously. That's the harsh reality Cardiac reflects, a system valuing profit over people's well-being. He's not just a regular hero. He fights with a sense of justice and moral obligation, making him a standout character deserving more recognition. He's not just muscles and gadgets though. He's super smart, a genius in fact, and a skilled surgeon. But his beta reactor of a heart always needs recharging, and if it fails, he's in for some trouble. Now his gear is super awesome too. He has a staff that shoots energy blasts and a high-tech glider for quick flights. All in all, Cardiac is a hero taking on big problems with a big heart, or well, a big beta particle reactor heart.
Everyone always forgets about Eric Masterson. Who is he? Well, he used to basically be Thor. For a while, Eric wielded Thor's hammer and took on his role as the Thunder God. Eventually, he'd go on to become his own hero, taking up the mantle of Thunderstrike, and no longer wielding Mjolnir, but instead his own mace weapon that looks similar to Thor's. I feel like, you know, Eric Masterson has also been like gone for a long time. Definitely not gonna see him anytime soon, but just it's good to remember Thunderstrike existed and he was cool. Next up, this is another character who I feel like has been gone for a very long time indeed. I feel like Machine Man would actually be a really interesting hero to have return in the comics in the modern age. Machine Man, also known as X-51, was a robot who was made as part of an experiment to see if robots could basically behave like humans. Sound familiar? While the experiment overall failed, X-51 did seem capable of behaving and thinking like a human himself due to the fact that he was raised like a human, a theory his creator, Aaron Stack, was attempting to test. So X-51 was like the one outlier of the batch. X-51 would take up the name Aaron Stack in honor of his creator, continuing to work towards Stack's dream of robot and human coexistence. He goes on a few adventures and even becomes an Avenger, but eventually leaves Earth to go off with the Celestials. And I'm pretty sure we've never seen him again. So, speaking of people that go off to space and do cool space things, Moondragon is a hero who doesn't get as much love from the Avengers in the comics. Now, sure, she's been around on the Guardians of the Galaxy team, but why not on the Avengers? For Guardians, she was given some love in Volume 6, but was also later believed dead in that same volume. Although more recently, it's actually been revealed that she's still alive in the 2024 annual. But while she's been doing okay in the comics for the Guardians, there is another area that I feel like she was kind of snubbed in. Other than the Avengers, I just also really wanted her to be on the Guardians of the Galaxy team in the MCU. I was really hoping in Volume 3 we'd get a Moondragon appearance. Sadly though, that never happened. I just really wanted Drax to like reconnect with Moondragon in the films and like learn that his daughter was still alive in spirit at least, and like have them reconnect, but no, that never happened. I mean, Drax still got to unlock his most dad form though, so I'm still cool with that and ultimately happy for him. I still think he got a pretty good ending, but come on, that would have been awesome, wouldn't it? Come on, James Gunn. I really wanted Moondragon. I would be Moondragon if someone wanted. I would shave my head to be Moondragon. That's how much I love her. Moondragon's great. Heather Douglas, underrated. Look, here's the thing. I love Laura and I just think she got snubbed by the Avengers. If you've seen my video on X-23 and her complete history here on the channel, then you know that she is a character who pretty much has ties to all major players in the Marvel Universe. And if you haven't seen that video, you should go check it out because it's super cool and I put a lot of work into it. Now, when it comes to Laura and all of her connections, this of course includes the Avengers. There was a time when she left the X-Men to find her place in the world, and part of that trip kind of involved joining the Avengers team. Well, not the mainstay team, although she has acted as an ally to the main Avengers team before. Laura was actually recruited to the Avengers Academy. But you know what? We don't talk about Avengers Academy enough, so I'm going to include Laura on this list. While she does manage to get a lot thrown her way over in the X-Men world, I feel like Laura's time with and connection to the Avengers has been somewhat forgotten in recent years and downplayed. Personally, I feel like she may even fit better on the Avengers team as opposed to the X-Men. That might be a hot take, but there it is. And let's be real, while we did try to heal wounds after Avengers vs X-Men, there's still a lot of work to do in regards to those two teams really coming together, and X-23 could be a part of that continued healing, or at least a version of X-23. I think she might still be, you know, she's out right now. She's down for the count. We have young X-23 though, but older X-23. You know what I mean. Speaking of Avengers Academy, Reptil is super underrated. He's such a fun character. He has not appeared either on the main Avengers team, but was recruited to Avengers Academy. Man, I just really want to see the Avengers Academy team get to like be Avengers together. Isn't that the whole point of Avengers Academy? To train people up to be Avengers? I feel like so few of them become Avengers. I would love it even just for a few issues. Even if it was like a guest appearance, I'd really like it. I just think it would be really cool. Reptil is basically like a dinosaur superhero. He isn't specifically a dinosaur, but he can basically modify his body or his power set based on those of prehistoric creatures. He can give himself wings, gain super strength, or even enhance his senses. I don't know what it is for me and animal characters, but we're continuing that theme with our next hero on our list. Honestly, I feel like Tigra is a very well-loved character among the fans, and she just doesn't get much love in the comics, at least not in regards to her place on the Avengers team. Now, if you're a Tigra fan, you can find her in Vengeance of the Moon Knight right now, where she's basically carrying on like Mark's work, fighting as a hero, but when it comes to her working with the Avengers, that hasn't happened for some time. Quite some time. Tigra was featured prominently as a member of the team back in the 80s, so if you remember those days, then yay, but for those that love Tigra but weren't around in the 80s, sad. How is it that we got a She-Hulk show and there was no Hellcat in there? Yeah, I'm continuing with the cat theme, friends. That honestly seems criminal to me. Hellcat is Patsy Walker. She was a member of the Avengers back in the 1970s. Most recently, she was around in the comics where she teamed up and partnered up romantically with fellow Avenger member Iron Man, aka Tony Stark. Following that, she was given her own series, but it was only a limited run, only a few issues. Limited. Not what I like to hear when I'm like, I want more of this character. What I miss are the days when Patsy was more prominently featured and actually had an ongoing series, but it feels like those days are behind us currently. Now she's less of a lead or team mainstay and more of just like a straight up supporting role. And even then, we couldn't get her in a supporting role in the live action She-Hulk. That just tells you how far she's fallen from the stars. This next hero might be a little bit of a hot take, but I'm gonna say it. Hank Pym deserved better. I know on our part 1 for this list I talked about Janet, and don't get me wrong, I obviously love Janet Van Dyne, and I also thought that she deserved better. In fact, I put her on part 1, so clearly I think the lack of Jan we've gotten is more of an emergency than Hank, but at the same time I feel like Hank as well has had it really rough. In fact, we don't even have Hank in the comics right now as Ant-Man because he's dead. Hank went from being a brilliant scientist and Avenger to someone who was mainly known for mistreating his wife, Janet, and being super troubled. We'd later learn that he was undiagnosed bipolar for many years, hence all of his mood swings and trouble with his identity, and just when it seemed like Hank actually might be getting better, he instead got merged with Ultron, and through that, basically was like killed. Unfortunately, we lost him at a time when I feel like he could have truly grown and evolved even more as a character. That could have been a powerful message too. This idea that you can have a mental illness or a neurodivergence and learn to not only deal with it, but thrive with it. That your mental illness doesn't have to define you. Like, hello, that would be a super powerful message. But no, Hank doesn't get to have redemption. He just dies. Well, a lot of these characters have been people that I've known and loved throughout Avengers history. This next one is one that I kind of just found out about, and I'm very perplexed that it's taken me this long. How am I just learning about Stingray now? Where has this character been all my life? I thought when it came to Marvel, Namor was the main character we had for the seas, and of course this is true. He is generally who people think of when they think Marvel-based oceanic hero or anti-hero, but we shouldn't only think of him because guess what? We have Stingray! Stingray is acclaimed oceanographer and engineer Walter Newell. When I was a kid, I actually wanted to be a marine biologist, fun fact about me. I also wanted to be a singer, but marine biologist was honestly my first love before I even wanted to be a singer or performer in any way. Yeah, I was kind of a weird kid. So a guy who is an oceanographer studying the oceans and who also helps fight to protect them is my hero. Stingray would go on to join the Avengers through basically becoming their landlord? I'm not kidding. He had a hydro base that he maintained with his wife and he offered it as the headquarters to the Avengers. It would go on to become Avengers Island. At one point the mansion was trashed and they basically ended up moving to the hydro base, which like I said, then we come to know as Avengers Island. Stingray has also acted as an ally to Namor and the two have teamed up together and been friends for some time, until more recently when Namor apparently forgot all about that friendship and then tried to kill Walter by getting some sharks to attack him. Rude, Namor. Rude. Earth, air, water, fire. This is a character who has learned to master them all. No, we're not talking about the Avatar, we are talking about the Inhuman hero, Crystal. Crystal is one of the best heroes we have when it comes to someone who can bend the elements to her will. But does she get any love? No. People know Storm, and of course Storm is awesome. People know Iceman, also an awesome character, but what about Crystal? In general, I feel like the Inhumans do not get enough love, but Crystal for me is really up there when it comes to some of the coolest Inhumans we have, both in terms of her abilities and her origin. She's basically an Inhuman princess who is often shown to want to explore the outside world, the world outside Atalan. This is how she runs into the Fantastic Four, and then ends up joining their team temporarily, and she also ends up running into the Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, and also ends up joining them for a time. I just love a runaway princess story, what can I say? I think it's just such a fun story. Havoc has had a complicated relationship with heroics throughout his life. Initially, he wanted nothing to do with being a hero, but found himself dragged into the superhero lifestyle anyway, due to him being a mutant and constantly getting tangled up in stories involving the X-Men. However, I feel like being on the Avengers actually suits him better as a character, also allowing him to get out from under his brother Scott's very long shadow. Havoc is very much a middle child, and I feel like often gets stuck as a result of this, so it was nice to see him come into his own. In general, I feel like Havoc simply doesn't get a lot to do in the comics. He was with Maddie during Dark X-Men recently, and was heavily featured in Hellions, but in both of those stories he kind of feels like a side character somewhat. And in Hellions, we basically were just dealing with all of Alex's trauma, which, you know, while important and I did love, don't get me wrong, I would still just like to see Alex when he's in his power a little bit more. And lately that's been missing somewhat from the comics with his character, I think.
Leave the saving of the world to the men? Silverclaw doesn't think so. Silverclaw is the daughter of mortal Jamie Santiago and a volcano goddess. The goddess gave Silverclaw to her father as a gift. She was to be the protector of his village. As Silverclaw was growing up, her powers began to show. Those powers are kinda like shape-shifting, specifically regarding animals native to South American jungles and forests. She doesn't need to fully transform her body into an animal to take on the characteristics of it. She assumes a form that combines her human appearance with the animals. She's done this with jaguars, monkeys, pumas, and more. Silverclaw was headed to America to meet up with Jarvis, oddly enough. She was his sponsor child. Her flight was hijacked, and the only way to ensure the other passengers' safety was if she agreed to help the bad guys. Eventually, the Avengers show up, defeat everybody, Silverclaw explains her side of the story, and the Avengers let her join so she can help them track down the hijackers. They thwarted the bad guys, and Silverclaw remained on the team.
Honestly, I just really love Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, and lately I feel like we haven't gotten enough of her. Unlike some of the others on our list though, Janet has at least gotten her dues in the past. I mean, she is also one of the original Avengers, but in the modern comics landscape, I feel like both Jan and her adopted, sort of in a weird way, stepdaughter, Nadia Van Dyne, have both fallen by the wayside.
We know Hawkeye, he's clearly doing well if his hit TV show and mainstream fame is anything to go by, but he had to learn all his skills from somebody. One of his teachers was Swordsman. He met Hawkeye while working in the circus. Swordsman's circus act was shockingly sword and knife based, and when Hawkeye finished his sword training, they were often a duo. Swordsman is an Avenger now, but he wasn't always a stellar citizen. He has robbed people and left people for dead and gotten himself banned from multiple countries, and originally joined the Avengers as a double agent, but he eventually had a change of heart due to his heart. During a period where Swordsman is taking a required break from the Avengers, he ends up working for this gangster, and that's where he meets the eventual love of his life, Mantis. Mantis said she can fix him, and she did. Now Swordsman has the self-respect needed to 100% leave crime behind, and the pair rejoined the Avengers. It went well, but it didn't end well. He died. It was super tragic. Mantis yells, "Darling, it's a moment." He comes back in the form of a sentient tree eventually, then dies again, then is revived again during the Chaos War, then died again. He deserves better than that. All that character development for what? He also has a really cool sword. It can shoot energy rays.
I personally love Monica a lot. She's just a strong member of the Avengers who honestly very rarely gets enough love in the comics. However, it is important to note that there are pockets here and there for us Monica fans, but I do wish we just got more of her in general, especially as a leader, which I think Monica is pretty great at doing. Monica Rambeau was a leader of the Avengers for a while, Monica Rambeau was a leader of the Avengers for a while in the 80s, but her time in that role was pretty short-lived due to her being tricked and manipulated into giving up leadership by Dr. Druid, after she was fatally wounded in a battle. Not only did Monica Rambeau lose her role as leader, but she was also zapped of her powers at this time, because that happened in the confrontation that also wounded her, prompting her to give up her leadership role. So she was all around severely nerfed at that time, and also mainly because Dr. Druid was working to betray his teammates this all happened. Monica would also be known as the first woman to use the mantle of Captain Marvel. That's right, a lot of people think it's Carol Danvers, but it was actually Monica. But after leaving the Avengers would lose that name as well and go on to become Photon instead. Now she had to give up her name because Captain Marvel's son appeared kinda out of the blue in the comics and wanted to use the name for himself. Fortunately, Monica would go on to lead the Next Wave team later on in her career, but she would also later find out that she had been manipulated into this role by Beyond. And even after fighting back against the Beyond Corporation, who is admittedly evil, she would have her personality altered due to this traumatic experience. So yeah, it's been a very mixed bag for Monica throughout her history, sadly. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, and a lot of the things that I love to read her in, she also kinda gets messed up in.
One thing about me, I love Sleepwalker. I think he is so neat, and trust and believe if I can get him on a list, I will. The MCU judges books by their cover because at first, multiple Avengers think Sleepwalker is a villain. That is not the case. He is a good guy. Sleepwalker is not just his name, but also his job. The Mindscape is a dimension that is in all sentient things, including you and I. It has beings in it whose sole purpose is to be evil and make people go insane by invading their mind. The Sleepwalkers stop this from happening and protect the minds of innocents. One of these Sleepwalkers was tricked by a longtime enemy into entering the mind of Rick Sheridan. They fought in the dream, but when the villain escaped, our hero was trapped and bonded to Rick. Eventually, Rick learned of his Sleepwalker buddy, and the two became co-inhibitors of Rick's mind. The Sleepwalker used his time on Earth to fight the evil entities from the Mindscape that materialized in the physical world. He was a member of Operation Lightning Storm, and being a part of this initiative when Quiet Man started causing problems, Sleepwalker got recruited to the Avengers to help out.
Quasar never gets enough love in my opinion. I'm not sure if it's because he has a similar vibe to Captain Marvel, or even at times in a weird way, not really power related, but Wonder Man. And both Marvel and Simon are just put above Wendell for some reason. But ever since I read more about Quasar in Dazzler, which I highly recommend you check out if you haven't already, I became more intrigued by his character, and then as a result disappointed when I learned he wasn't really as prominently featured today as some other heroes are, for some reason. Granted, Quasar, while niche, has still been in hundreds of issues. Still, I wish he had his own book today, or at least appeared more regularly in someone else's solo series, or was just like on a team. Honestly, I miss the days of the old Dazzler comic. I loved him as a supporting character there. I just want to relive those days. Also bring the Dazzler series back, it's so good.
The rootinest tootinest cowboy in the Wild Wild West, Two Gun Kid. He isn't technically a cowboy, but he sure does look and act like one. Personally, I love the musical Oklahoma and by extension the cowboy aesthetic, so to me this hero absolutely deserves the world. He is not supercharged, he is just a guy that wanted to be a hero. He trained until he was an expert gunfighter and horseback rider. He's also a master of the lasso, iconic. He is from the 1870s, he did all his training in the 1870s and grew very, very famous. Think like Annie Oakley, Billy the Kid. So how did he end up in the modern era? When the Avengers were fighting time-traveling thorn in their side Kang the Conqueror, they ended up conveniently in the same time as Two Gun. Two Gun was obviously interested in the people from the future and helped them fight. He did good and was offered a reserve spot in the 20th century, which worked out well. He could explore everything the modern world had to offer and only help the Avengers when absolutely necessary. Getting homesick for the homestead, he returned to his era eventually, but continued to help the Avengers whenever they visited. Two Gun Kid is part of the reason heroes like Hawkeye and Angel came to be. Hawkeye was inspired by Two Gun's heroism and took up the style when he became a hero, and Angel, before he was Angel, was Two Gun's doctor in his old age. Two Gun made sure to tell him about the heroes of the future, and those stories ended up inspiring Angel to become Angel. Two Gun Kid had an impact.
Look, I saw Madam Web, and it was and experience, to put it lightly. Of course, for this list, we're talking about Julia Carpenter's Madame Web though, not Cassandra, but to be honest, I wasn't too happy with how she was featured in the film either. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of why it was bad here because that would be honestly a whole other video. In fact, I've actually done 2 on that subject on my own channel, but trust me when I say it's a disaster of a film, okay? Just trust me. It's just so bad, and it feels like it undermines the powerful and much beloved character of Julia Carpenter, as well as honestly everyone else, but we're talking about Julia. Julia was the second woman to take up the Spider-Woman mantle after Jessica Drew, and it was during her time as Spider-Woman that she came to have a few adventures with the main Avengers team, later going on to fully join the West Coast Avengers. And I just think she's great. She doesn't get enough praise.
Hi, before I say this state name, I would like to clarify again, I'm Canadian, so please don't make fun of me, I will say it wrong. The man from Massachusetts, Dane Whitman, the Black Knight. The Black Knight is a mantle that gets passed down, so there have been a bunch, and not always good guys. The Black Knight, before Dane, his uncle, was a villain and requested that Dane not be. Good news, Dane wasn't, he joined the Avengers. He got on the Avengers' radar by telling them Magneto captured 2 of their teammates. He doesn't join right away, he spends some time at his family's estate first, a castle. You learn pretty quick that the Black Knight has a very specific medieval aesthetic. The Black Knight travels by Pegasus, and he has this really cool weapon called the Ebony Blade. The Ebony Blade is a double-edged sword, but seriously, it gives the wielder basically immunity and can cut through anything. But it will slowly corrupt its user, that's the downside. Black Knight officially joined the Avengers after defeating Kang together, but he had been an ally to them long before that. He was a great asset to the team. He wasn't just a great fighter with epic transportation, he was also incredibly intelligent. Black Knight might finally be getting the mainstream fame he deserves. He was in the MCU movie Eternals, played by Kit Harington. He wasn't like a major character, but at the end we see him gain possession of the Ebony Blade, so it's pretty clear it's him. And with Kit Harington in the role, it's definitely something to look forward to, even if we don't know when we'll see the character again on screen. The series One Star Squadron debuted in 2022. It featured unpopular heroes combining their limited star power to create heroes for you. It's like a mix between Uber, Cameo, and 911. For these C-list heroes, the C stands for capitalism. People use the Heroes for You app for on-demand hero assistance. Situations you may need a hero for include, but are not limited to, alien attacks, transporting sensitive information, birthdays, or getting your kitty out of a tree. No job is too big or small, they will answer the call. I love this idea. Trust and believe, if I were a D or C-list superhero, I would be on here. I also think this idea is so clever from the writer's point of view. They were able to bring back a bunch of characters, so many fun characters all at once. The app and agency was led by Red Tornado, but other heroes you could request were the Heckler. I would request him. His power is literally just being annoying. Just send him to that person you mildly dislike, takes care of it. Let me know down below who you would sick the Heckler on. Minuteman is available. He has a bunch of powers, but only for 1 minute at a time. There is Flying Fox, who is known for magic things like invisibility and illusions, good for a birthday. There are a bunch more heroes too. That's just a taste of all the options. I just love this idea. Literally all these heroes just deserve better. I have a soft spot for silly superheroes. What can I say? I like to laugh as much as I like the serious stuff. Section 8 made me giggle, specifically this one guy on the superhero team. His name is Defenestrator. Defenestrator from now on will be Mr. D. He literally just goes around with a window and smashes it over villains' heads. In all fairness, defenestration is literally the act of throwing someone out a window. I'm obsessed. Mr. D started out a villain but was recruited to the Hero Squad Section 8 by Hero 6-Pack. The team is made up of just wacky heroes with wacky names. We have Dog Welder. He welds dogs. I'm being so serious. There's Bueno Excelente. That is literally good, excellent in Spanish. Phlegm Gem. He has blinding phlegm. Gross. Friendly Fire. He is the most traditional. He shoots energy blasts. And then there is Jean de Baton Baton. He fights with, take a guess, a baton, and he is French. The entire thing is so camp and also a tiny bit problematic, which is probably why it hasn't picked up much steam. The Metal Men were created by Dr. William Magnus in the New Earth DC universe. Slingers. The team is an interesting idea, metals with human-like bodies and the capacity to form thoughts and personalities. Dr. William created the Metalmen using his invention, the responsometer. It's a microcomputer that can give metal life. The Metalmen are made up of 5 male metals, gold, tin, mercury, lead, and iron, and 1 female metal, platinum. The team is such a specific brand of hero, so they fought a specific brand of villain too, monsters that appeared due to odd scientific research. The team has fought alongside Batman. Initially they were arrested by Batman because they were framed for something, but their names were cleared eventually. After getting their names cleared, they took down a bunch of evil robots together. The nice thing about the Metal Heroes is they can literally be remade whenever, as long as Dr. William has his microcomputer and a bit of the Metal Heroes can be brought back. The metals can also be combined to create the formidable foe alloy. Here's the thing, I spend time on the internet, clearly, and I'm also just a girl, so I will see these videos of people personifying different inanimate things like apps and countries and cars. So I think now is really the time to push the Metalmen. Inanimate objects given life are in right now, trust me. The Challengers of the Unknown have an interesting origin story. They were a bunch of guys on a plane that were flying to go be guests on a radio show called Heroes, later changed to a TV show. They were above average guys though. One was considered a master of skin diving, another a daredevil working in the circus, an Olympic wrestling champion, and trained jet pilot and war hero. Just quite a mix of people. Of course, the plane they were in went down and the Fab Four of course survived. After the crash, they all have that wow, we almost died moment, and they decided that they are all living on borrowed time and that they should challenge the unknown together. Challenging the unknown really is what these guys did. They were also a for-hire service too. They got hired to open Pandora's box. Pandora's box is something you famously should not open. However, they were offered $1 million, not saying I would do it, but I get it. These guys start kind of taking on jobs that are too out there for others or too hard. They worked with the Pentagon of all places. One member loses their sight along the way, so a different member gives them an eyeball, they go through it. They had created their home base in a mountain. The personification of evil comes by and blows it up. At a certain point, the team really just can't catch a break. Eventually, there are new team members, a games designer, a physicist, a NASCAR driver, and a commercial pilot. What I think is cool about this particular DC team are the people on the team are just people. They have semi-regular jobs and just decided to start conquering challenges despite not receiving any superpowers. The Sea Devils, like the Challengers and Batman, were just regular people doing extraordinary things. They appeared in Showcase issue 27 in 1960 but got their own series the next year. The group was made of 4 people. Dane Dorrance was the leader. The other members were his girlfriend Judy Walton, Judy's younger brother Nicky Walton, and friend Biff Bailey. The group spent most of their time underwater, of course. They spent a lot of time living every ocean-obsessed kid's dream. They fought sea monsters and discovered underwater kingdoms. Like truly, if I was guaranteed to never drown, I would join this crew so fast. Spending so much time with aquatic life and fighting in the sea, the group also fought for the sea on land. They are environmentalists and are suggested to maybe be a bit extreme at times with their methods in the New 52 reboot, but they remain allies to Aquaman. The duality of the universe being manifested in human form has been done so many times, and yet it always hits. Hawk and Dove are another version of this. They were inspired by the political climate of the 1960s, with the characters debuting in 1968. People that were more in favor of war were often referred to as hawks, and the dove is commonly a symbol of peace. So from that, we get the aggressive hawk and the level-headed dove. In the DC universe, the Lords of Chaos and Order decided to bestow powers on a set of brothers, Hank and Don Hall, making them effectively War and Peace. They wore matching outfits, one was red and the other blue. The pair worked well together as Hawk often acted without thinking and Dove would think without action. Hawk was shoot first, ask questions later kind of vibe, whereas Dove made sure to provide the compassion and solutions that didn't require physical conflict. A perfect balance that was unfortunately thrown out of balance when Dawn passed on during the Crisis on Infinite Earths fiasco. It would be disastrous if just War was out here on their own, so a replacement had to be found, and that was Dawn Granger. The Lords chose her because she was level-headed and willing to find compromise and see reason and other perfect peaceful qualities. After the loss of his brother, naturally Hawk took some time getting used to his new counterpart, but eventually accepted her. The characters of Hawk and Dove have plenty of potential, and yet their solo series are never that long. They got some credit on the screen. They made their animated debut in Justice League Unlimited in 2004 episode, then made their live-action debut in 2018's Titans. I am about to put up missing posters for this team because honestly, where did you come from? Where did you go? Justicia is the hero team of Mexico. Justicia is Spanish for Justice, the Justice League of Mexico basically. They first appeared in Suicide Squad, Most Wanted, El Diablo, and Amanda Waller 5. They were in 6 too, but then goodbye, I guess. The team is led by El Dorado. He's almost a Mexican version of Superman. He can fly and he's really buff. He is also capable of teleporting and minor telepathy. He also really looks like Miguel from Into the Spider-Verse. Anyway, there are 3 other members on the team. Akrara, a skilled martial artist and acrobat that wears a Mayan artifact that gives her teleportation abilities. Then we have El Muerto, an undead hero, which makes him hard to hurt the way you might hurt someone who's alive. And finally, we have E-Man. He wears a suit of armor that gives him superior strength. There are some connections between this team and the Justice League. El Muerto used to idolize Superman, and E-Man received a scholarship from Wayne Enterprises. E-Man and Batman also share similar parent trauma. Each individual hero has had a handful of appearances, it's just the team that hasn't come up much. I think they are neat and should get more chances to show off together. So now we have shed some light on the MIA superhero team for Mexico, now we are heading to look at the main team for Japan. Big science action. The founding members were Boss Bozozuko, he had a flaming head and a bike. Cosmo Racer was an alien android that required specific crystals to power his interstellar traveling. Goriko is a projection that comes from the mind of a young Japanese girl that is currently existing in a sensory deprivation tank. Hammer Suit Zero X is a monster armor made of sturdy metal and has drills for weapons. Junior Waveman is the Japanese version of the Sea Devils mentioned earlier, but this time there are 8 people. The solar physicist known as Rising Sun is on the team as well. A Japanese stuntman known by his hero name Sunburst was on the team but perished in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Finally, Ultimon, a hero dedicated to fighting giant monsters. Since its founding, the team has integrated some new members, and throughout history, big science action has saved Japan from many threats. The team might not be out as much anymore because after Final Crisis, the government confined the Super Squad to their base. We are about to get into the team that was originally published by Image Comics, later DC. The team is Wetworks. Wetworks is an actual term meaning work involving assassination, so you can probably guess the vibe. They are a covert operations team in the Wildstorm universe. Their leader is Jackson Dyne. Technically, the original covert op team name was Team 7. The team was sent out to raid this cave, but the cave was already raided when they got there, except for these tubes filled with gold liquid. The team had a lot of remote controlled weapons on them that happened to start a countdown to detonate while they were inside. Then everything goes wrong all at once. The tubes get shot, the liquid gets on these people and surrounds them, and then the explosives go off. But it turns out the liquid acted like protective armor because it was symbiotes. Adding a sim to someone automatically makes them cooler, but you know what makes them even cooler? When they fight vampires. This team has been running across Eastern Europe making sure they can't remake Twilight. They had lost members along the way and even temporarily stopped because of it. They regrouped after the world cataclysm and were called to Utah, of all places. Turns out someone was trying to make demonite vampire hybrids. In the ensuing fight, the Sims all mutated and the Wetworks team started getting new powers. The new power played a key role in stopping the vampire hybrids from existing. Atomic Fallout seemed to be a popular origin story for heroes. The Heroes of Lallor are no different. The Heroes of Lallor are a team of 5 heroes. Their parents lived close enough to the site of the atomic fallout on their world that their genes were altered, resulting in their children all being born with powers. The kids were sent away from the planet and decided to come to Earth. They were tricked, bamboozled, lied to by this guy named Dr. Martin King. He made the young heroes think that the Legion of Superheroes were criminals. Why? So he could avenge his brother's death. Because this random group of people from outer space started attacking them, the Legion also thought the Heroes of Lallor were the bad guys. They fought for a bit, but soon realized that they were both fighting with good intentions and became friends instead. Unfortunately, one of the Lallor members did pass away, Beast Boy. Not the one you're thinking of, a different guy. You know how I know the Heroes of Lallor deserve better? They used one of the characters' name for another hero, and that guy is eons more popular. Their powers are even similar. The Lallor Beast Boy has the power to turn into any animal, and the more popular Beast Boy does the same thing. There were 5 heroes on the team. The others were Gas Girl, she can change her body into any gas. There is a Volvo Lad, he can make his body into any point in human evolution, so he can become an ape or the kind of man humanity can't even imagine yet. Life Last can create living creatures from inanimate objects, Beauty and the Beast core. And finally, Duplicate Boy, he can duplicate any hero's superpowers. Eventually, the surviving 4 make it back to their home planet. They even gained a new member, Splitter, or Arm Fall Off Boy.
When we say that these teams deserve better, there really isn't a better example than the Harvesters. After the events of the Superhuman Civil War, Iron Man created the 50-State Initiative. This was essentially an initiative to set up government-funded superhero teams throughout each of the United States. states. Some of these teams were already established groups of heroes, but for some states, completely new groups composed of local heroes were formed. The Sunflower State, Kansas, gained its team in the form of the Harvesters. This new team was made up of pretty strange heroes that we hadn't seen before. Topeka, who led the team, was basically just a super soldier. Then there was Pioneer, who had the power of the plains, as she put it. Sunflower, who was literally a human sunflower who got stronger under direct sunlight and appeared to have a high degree of durability. There was Meadowlark, who could fly and sing to hypnotize people. And then, of course, there was Grainbelt, whose body was literally made of grain that he could control. Why did they deserve better? Well, this team's only claim to fame came when they faced off against a zombie clone of the hero Hyperion, who is basically the Marvel equivalent of Superman, and he utterly destroyed each member of this team. They did not stand a single chance. Only Pioneer just barely made it out alive by raising up an entire herd of undead cattle and trampling the zombie Hyperion, who then succumbed to mad cow disease, and I wish I made that up. Now, most of you nerds have heard about the Skrulls. This alien race has been a nuisance in Marvel Comics ever since their first appearance in Fantastic Four #2. The Skrull members who fought the Four at this time ended up hypnotized into believing they were actually cows by Reed Richards, and they shapeshifted into and were stuck as cows. What I'm sure Reed did not anticipate is that these Skrull cows ended up finding themselves in a butcher and turned into beef. This Skrull beef was then consumed by regular old Earthlings. Now, while a good majority of people did not survive the Skrull cow meat, a select few did, and had the Skrull's adaptable DNA code transferred into their human cells, resulting in a condition called Skrullivoria-induced Skrullophobia. The infected individuals gained the ability to shapeshift like a Skrull, but also developed an intense irrational fear and hatred of the Skrull, and they came together to form the aptly named Skrull Kill Crew. Fueled by their irrational impulses to destroy the Skrull, they helped prevent the Skrulls from attacking other people, but they even faced off against other villains like Baron von Strucker. It's just a really unfortunate way to gain a superpower. Now, X-Force is the awesome Black Ops X-Men related team with characters like Domino and Cable and Cannonball and Wolverine and Warpath, and it's awesome. But for a short little while, it was decidedly not awesome. In the year 2000, X-Force got cancelled and rebranded into what eventually would become X-Statix. This team isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The original team was made up of the mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of Super Puke, La Nuit with Dark Force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who was basically a squid man. But all of those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of Ecstatics who have passed away over their history, with only 9 surviving. 9. Okay, so we have Ecstatics, we have X-Force, we have the X-Men of course, and we have a whole handful of other X-branded teams, but some mutants aren't considered presentable to the outside world because whatever their mutation is, it has been deemed either gross or terrifying by the wider Marvel human society, or they are mutants who are just bitter about being persecuted for being mutants. This group banded together, named themselves the Morlocks, and headed down into the Morlock tunnels beneath New York City. Already, without anything happening to them other than their mutations, these characters have it rough and deserve better. But then, to add flame to the fire, the Morlocks undergo tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, with one of the worst being the event known as the Mutant Massacre, where Mr. Sinister and the Mutant Gambit put together a group of villainous characters and led them into the tunnels to commit, well, a massacre. And it was all because another villain, Dark Beast, created some of these Morlocks, and Mr. Sinister didn't like that. Sometimes it takes the smallest of things to bring people together, and while that may sound like an extremely beautiful sentiment, I'm saying it in relation to the villainous team known as the Headmen, who it seems came together because each of their powers revolves around their heads in one way or another, and it's honestly kind of unsettling in my opinion. Putting their heads together, figuratively, not literally, these scientists sought out world domination, bringing them into conflict with the Defenders, She-Hulk, and Spider-Man. The quartet consisted of Arthur Nagin, their leader, who had his head transplanted onto the body of a gorilla, Ruby Thursday, who replaced her own head with an organic computer capable of changing shape, Gerald Morgan, aka Shrunken Bones, who accidentally shrank his own skeleton, including his skull, so he basically just had really baggy skin, and Chandu the Mystic's head had been transplanted by Nagin onto a number of different bodies throughout his time, making him quite the versatile little guy. Not gonna lie. The Champions of Los Angeles were the first West Coast-based superhuman team. They formed like all great superhero teams do, with several heroes happening to just meet by chance against a great threat. In this case, that threat took the form of the Greek god of death, Pluto. The group consisted of two former X-Men, Angel and Iceman, the Greek god of strength, Hercules, who I swear is super underappreciated, Johnny Blaze, the original Ghost Rider, and the Russian spy Black Widow, who led the team. After defeating Pluto, the Champions of Los Angeles, or just the Champions, decided to stick together as a team. Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, was the wealth behind the group, and with his money they bought their own Quinjet and named it the Champ Jet, which I find hilarious because over time, the members of this team started to become embarrassed by the entire idea of the team as a whole. Both Iceman and Angel called it an embarrassment and a nightmare because they had no idea what they were doing. But still, they had a few more adventures working with X-Force, and they had some additions to the roster with Black Goliath, who aided the team in a scientific aspect, and another Russian female hero, Darkstar, who was originally there to capture Black Widow but ended up changing sides instead. I'm gonna be honest, I kinda love the lineup of this team. I'd read it if they came back. Now you remember how the Headmen all came together based on their head-related powers? Well, I'll do you one better. How about the Death Throws, whose powers and names all have something to do with commonly throwing stuff. The leader, Ringleader, threw together teammates Bombshell, Knick-Knack, Oddball, Tenpin, and Throwdown into a group that honestly works really well together, juggling their various different throwing instruments between each other. They worked so well together, in fact, that they were even hired to and succeeded in breaking the villain Crossfire out of prison. However, once they had taken Crossfire to their HQ, they discovered that Crossfire was broke. His assets had all been impounded, and he had lost all of his useful connections. These guys did battle with characters like Captain America, Crossfire, Hawkeye, and even Loki, of all people, who stopped the group from robbing the Big Top Casino in Las Vegas. Their Marvel wiki even lists their origins as, and I quote, a joint effort to perform criminal and mercenary acts while using juggling expertise. I honestly can't even believe this group of villains exists and that they haven't been able to get Bullseye into their ranks. What the heck's up with that? Okay, of all the teams on this list, I think that Horticulture may be my favorite. For starters, they look so cool, but then you find out that it's actually just a bunch of older women between the ages of 64 to 81 who are all expert botanists and want to bring Earth back to a more pristine time when it had about 7 billion less people on it, and it was ruled by plant life. I just love how they use their regular names, and the names just kinda suit their ages and interests in plants. We got Augusta Bromes, Lily Lamus, Edith Scutch, and Opal Vetiver. Gosh! What a bunch of winners. But yes, that's right, these ladies want to basically exterminate most of the Earth's human population and bring plants back to the forefront, specifically flowers. This goal brings them into conflict with the X-Men in 2019's X-Men number 3. Beyond biological modifications believed to have been made to themselves, the women of horticulture are experts at manipulating the environment to suit their extinction agenda, and they're also computer programmers selling software to Orcus to monitor Krakoan gateways. They did get pretty handily walloped though, so Second to last, as part of kid-centric Star Comics, Marvel decided to release a team composed of animal superheroes, which is cool. But the difference here is this team of animal heroes were cybernetically enhanced super intelligent animals with absolutely massive arsenals and awesome exoskeletons, which is much cooler. And they fought for the environment, which is even cooler. This team was made up of Boomer, a kangaroo, Lionheart, a lion, Soar / Slipstream, an eagle, Reckless, who was a bear, and Dr. Echo / Surfstreak, who was a dolphin. Does it sound kind of ridiculous? Sure, but it is awesome. This team was co-created by Multicore, spearheaded by Dr. Randall Pierce, and it was all part of Weapons 2, which itself was the second project after Weapon 1. Who would have thought? Also known as Project Rebirth, also known as the project that created Captain America. Now some of you may know that these projects were part of a bigger thing called Weapons Plus, who would eventually go on to create Man-Thing, Luke Cage, Nuke, Typhoid Mary, Phantom X, the Stepford Cuckoos, and of course, Wolverine. So most people know that they aren't exactly a good group of people. While their original series was cancelled after only a few issues in Wolverine and Captain America Weapons Plus #1, those two heroes investigated an abandoned Weapons Plus site where they found the team kept in hibernation tanks full of liquid. The bear, Reckless, was freed from his container but attacked the duo, resulting in his passing. And last up today, first ever introduced in 1989's West Coast Avengers Volume 2 number 46, the Great Lake Avengers formed after Mr. Immortal put out an ad in the local personals seeking men and women of action to join forces and form a team of super friends. This managed to catch the attention of Avengers members Hawkeye and Mockingbird. In order to help them out, the Great Lakes Avengers were trained by the duo and the rest was history. The team is made up of pretty much Z-list heroes, with the main lineup usually consisting of Mr. Immortal, Doorman, Big Bertha, and Flatman. Naturally, as a sort of running joke throughout Marvel Comics since their introduction, the team goes up against some of the zaniest villains and situations I have ever seen, and they don't do particularly well. But I'll be darned if I don't have a soft spot for this team. The funny thing about most joke characters and teams is that they almost always end up actually doing some pretty extraordinary things from time to time.
Sleepwalker is his name, but there is a possibility that it actually isn't. He is part of the Sleepwalker race. They're kind of like dream police. They protect beings that are sleeping from the evil entities that want to invade their head. Sleepwalker was tracking one of these beings into the mind of Rick Sheridan, but the villain tricked him into getting trapped inside Rick's mind. Sleepwalker's story is really similar to Venom's story. Human gets attached to alien, and they have to learn to live with each other. The difference here is Sleepwalker can't separate from his host. In fact, the only time he was able to exist outside of his host was when Rick was sleeping. If Rick was awake, Sleepwalker was just kind of in the back of his mind. Rick did eventually figure out that he had an alien attached to him, and he didn't take it very well. He figured that if he never slept, the alien would never come out, and that went just as well as you think. He did eventually just pass out due to exhaustion. At a certain point, the pair come to realize that they aren't getting out of this and form a hero-host bond, and Sleepwalker is able to exist when his host is awake. Sleepwalker's powers include warp gaze. He twists and alters the shape of physical objects, including people. Thankfully, he is a good guy and refuses to do that to a person because it would cause way too much mental trauma. I think Sleepwalker should get either screen time or just even more panel time because he is a proven asset. Not only is he a great fighter, he can also enhance mental powers just by being near the person with them. That means Professor X, Jean Grey, Doctor Strange. You cannot tell me Sleepwalker wouldn't be an excellent addition to a super team. Plus, apparently, according to Rick, his voice sounds like Vincent Price, the horror star of the golden age of Hollywood and the guy who did the Thriller monologue. As you can see, I am very passionate about my guy. Now switching over to the DC hero that I will fight for day and night until I die, the Heckler. I can't even begin to explain how upset I am that his series was cancelled early. That's pain, but it ended on a cliffhanger and I was just starting to get interested, and that is double pain. The Heckler debuted in the 90s and he does have 90s comic energy to him. He disappeared for a long time after his series was cancelled at 6 issues. His appearances after that were just like cameos, but then in 2022, DC released One Star Squadron. That series was a team of D-list heroes created for hero for hire business. So you could get a superhero for like your office Christmas party or a birthday. Heckler was part of this business, but he looked very different. I am grateful the character was brought back, but I miss the original. The original Heckler was drawn in a very specific style. His comic was really interesting to look at. It was very experimental though, so I get DC not wanting to do that again. I really liked the original comics because they were a parody of hero comics. The creators wanted to make the Bugs Bunny of the hero world, so Heckler had no actual powers. His power was be annoying until the person defeats themselves. Maybe I love him because I can relate, I don't know. Heckler deserves better than to just fade into obscurity. Dazzler is one underrated hero who is just starting to get the major recognition she deserves. She was originally a known character, but then she had a brief period where she kind of fell off, but now she is back and shining brighter than ever. Marvel has been putting in the work on their end, putting her back in the pages and up on the screen, but I would argue a lot of Dazzler's recent mainstream fame has to do with Taylor Swift. Say what you will about Taylor Swift, but you cannot deny that her name holds power. Barely anyone outside of like nerd fandoms knew who Dazzler was, but then Taylor Swift might be playing her and suddenly Dazzler's the talk of the town, which she deserves. Dazzler is a pop star and she converts sound that reaches her body into light. The light can manifest as a blinding flash or a blast or lasers, holograms, mists, and like her name, dazzle people by making her body sparkle in a way that throws off someone's mind. Dazzler has many fans in the Marvel Universe, including Kitty Pryde, Juggernaut, and Colossus. She also has fans outside the Marvel Universe, including me and you. It's nice to see this underrated hero finally getting the love that she deserves. I am about to put up missing posters for this team because where did they go? Justicia is the Justice League, but for Mexico. Justicia is Spanish for justice, so it's pretty on the nose with that one. They first appeared in Suicide Squad, Most Wanted, El Diablo, and Amanda Waller 5 and 6 as the team. Then a few team members were in some Superman comics, and that's it. The team leader is El Dorado. He's Superman but Mexican, pretty much. He can fly, he's strong, he can teleport, and do minor telepathy. There are 3 other members on the team. Akrata, a skilled martial artist and acrobat capable of teleportation due to the Mayan artifact she wears. Then we have El Muerto, he's undead, which makes him hard to kill. Finally, we have Iman. He wears a suit of armor that gives him superior strength. There are connections between Justicia and the Justice League. El Muerto used to idolize Superman, and Iman received a scholarship from Wayne Enterprises. Iman and Batman also share very similar trauma. Each individual hero has had a handful of appearances. The team has had 2. I think that they are a neat team and they should get more chances to show off together. Lorna the Jungle Queen has been MIA for too long. It's time to bring her back and give her a slight writing redemption arc. Lorna, as a character, super interesting, pure of heart, strong, great role model. The comics she's in though, they contain some depictions of cultures that are not great and are very outdated. Her series is from the 50s. Lorna is very cool though, and I think Marvel could bring her back quite easily if they wanted to. Lorna is all about protecting her home. She lives in the African rainforests. She works with and saves the wildlife there from poachers. Lorna tries to never use guns while fighting because they might jam or break, but she can always rely on herself. If she did use a weapon, it was likely a spear because she trained with them a lot while growing up. It appears that Lorna doesn't have any supernatural abilities, she's just a really strong and smart woman. If the MCU or comics wanted to give her some spotlight, they could definitely bring her in using Wakanda, considering that both locations are in Africa. I know that Red Bee isn't everyone's favorite, but I can't get through explaining his story without laughing, and that makes him a winner in my books. Red Bee's thing is he fights using trained bees he keeps in his belt buckle. He apparently even has a favorite bee that is special. That bee is Michael. Michael can pick locks and sting multiple times. Red Bee isn't completely helpless without his bees. He is trained in acrobatics and hand-to-hand combat and law. I would like to share with y'all a fun fact from his wiki page. In his brief career in Hit Comics, which is 24 issues, the Red Bee was hit in the head hard enough to knock him unconscious a minimum of 14 times. Were the bees really there, or was he just hit in the head too many times? The character was recently seen fighting alongside Peacemaker. I hope that with all the parodies and spin-offs DC has been greenlighting, Red Bee finds himself in there somewhere. Moving into the movies though, the MCU, I think the Eternals deserve better. The concept of the Eternals is so interesting. The characters and their histories are so cool. They had such an incredible cast, but the movie fell flat for a lot of viewers. It has a 47% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, which is literally a tragedy. I was really looking forward to them, and it's my personal opinion that Eternals should have been a show. One episode per member of the team to properly explore their backstory and emotional weight in the conflict, instead of trying to force all of that into 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know this is a controversial topic, not saying the movie was a dumpster fire, but I think a show would have suited the team better. I would love to hear if you agree with me or not, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. To the person though who did comment on one of our past videos that Captain Comic is always forgotten, I see you, I hear you, and today we will remember him together. Captain Comet is also known as Adam Blake, and he is a mutant for DC. When you hear mutant in the superhero context, most people think Marvel, but DC has some mutants too, Captain Comet being one of them. He was born way before his time, 100,000 years before, in fact. He is described as the first man of the future. The old Adam and the new version of Adam, they have very similar origin stories. When he was born, a comet flew across the sky, emitting radiation. The radiation triggered Adam's cells into multi-genetic cell growth, which caused him to develop mental powers. As he grew up, he realized he was not only mentally strong, but physically too. He was indestructible. Other powers of his include telepathy, teleportation, poison immunity, telekinesis, clairvoyance, photographic memory, and he can just read people really well, know how much of a fight they will put up, how they're feeling at any given moment. Truly, this guy is a powerhouse that I would love to see more of. Marvel has quite a few cowboy characters at varying degrees of popularity, but Jim Gardley seems to be at the bottom of the pyramid despite being Marvel's first cowboy. Many think it was Two Gun Kid, but it was actually Jim, better known as Masked Raider. There are a few reasons why Jim has faded away from the cowboy spotlight, but the big one was his series wasn't as long as other Marvel cowboys, and he was active in the 1930s and 40s. With the internet, you can find and read the stories now, but imagine trying to track down Marvel Comics Volume 1, Issue 1 without the internet. Impossible task. So poor Jim faded into obscurity. The Masked Raider got his name because he wore the Eternity Mask to hide his identity. The Eternity Mask is not a toy. It gives the user cosmic equality. Whoever wears it is automatically equal in power to whoever they might fight. There is a catch though, the user can't have evil intentions. The mask also leads heroes to where they are needed, sometimes preventing problems before they start. The Masked Raider inspired a secret society that formed using his message of fighting the lawless and bringing justice to the oppressed, so that's his legacy in the comics. It's a shame that a character that was the first Marvel cowboy and the wielder of a pretty major magical artifact is barely remembered. I just recently discovered someone called Diamond Jack, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about him since. He sounds like one of the most powerful heroes DC has ever created, and yet they haven't really done anything with him since his short run in the 40s. Diamond Jack was once just a guy. Then he met an old magician who gave him a magical diamond capable of making its user physically strong and mentally beyond all ordinary mortals. Jack got the diamond as long as he promised to help people, and it really is just that easy. You too can become a superhero just by talking to your local magician. As Jack is a pretty sturdy guy, but average, the ring is where it's at. It can transform objects like projectiles into flowers, weapons to candy. He turned a witch's magic book into a recipe book titled 1000 Ways to Cook Spinach, so clearly he has a sense of humor. The ring can also create convincing illusions or even conjure a brand new physical object from thin air, like when he gave himself a sword or that time he created a parachute. Jack is shown to be pretty much unstoppable, so I would love to see him brought back and see if he would still be that powerful today, even when placed next to some of DC's current most powerful beings.
When the amazing Captain Britain is sent to Earth 238, there are no heroes of any kind. What we come to learn is that a guy named Mad Jim Jaspers is the Prime Minister of England, and he has created a cyborg called the Fury that can adapt to anything to destroy all the superpowered beings on this Earth. But we are being delivered this information from inside of a teapot helicopter that is immensely bigger on the inside than it looks looks on the outside, with the room growing and characters appearing that are deceased or that resembled Alice in Wonderland characters. That's because Mad Jim Jaspers has the ability to warp reality, one of only a handful of characters who can do so. Eventually, when Earth 238's reality is completely destroyed, we're introduced to an Earth 616 reality, Mad Jim Jaspers, who is actually way more powerful than his 238 counterpart. When Captain Britain pays him a visit, Jim uses his powers to make Captain Britain believe he was dreaming and that he has woken up out of a coma. Jim then gets frustrated and wipes this entire reality clean to start fresh. He is eventually destroyed by the Fury cyborg that survived the 238 reality, who teleports Mad Jim to the empty 238 reality where there is no reality for Mad Jim Jaspers to warp, and the Fury cyborg destroys him. I think Marvel kinda realized that they created someone much too powerful and had a literal Deus Ex Machina wipe him out before you could do anything more. To quote a user on Quora, Kite Man has always been kind of a joke. Back when Kite Man appeared in Batman number 133, not even his creators Bill Finger and Dick Sprang took him seriously. Kite Man would just randomly show up in a story, stealing something or flying around or just the usual villain stuff, shouting his catchphrase, "Kite Man, hell yeah," before being effortlessly crushed by Batman or whoever else was around. He was pathetic, and that made him funny. Then along comes the War of Jokes and Riddles. The story is as much Kite Man's origin story as it is a Batman second year story. Basically, the Joker and the Riddler go to war. Enter Charlie Brown, a divorced loving father and lowly aerodynamics engineer who just so happens to have helped design the Joker's car. Riddler promptly exploited him as a spy before Batman did the same thing, and in the chaos of it all, Brown's son was tragically lost thanks to the Riddler. Riddler ended up poisoning the rope used to maneuver a kite that Brown and his son loved to play with, so in retaliation, Brown builds a costume and becomes a henchman for the Joker, taking on the identity of Kite Man to remind himself why he's even doing this. Now, Kite Man does eventually get some measure of justice, but that's his origin. He's a shattered man in a city that's taken everything from him, and now he's Kite Man, a literal joke. A pathetic joke whose existence is justified by the fact that it honors his son. He's not evil or crazy or even a criminal, he's just incredibly broken, and that is sad. But moving on from that, I feel like people don't realize just how dangerous the Absorbing Man from Marvel Comics can really be. Back in the day, that was certainly true, but with his inclusion in the more recent stories, particularly the Immortal Hulk, people have come to understand just how powerful the Absorbing Man is. His main power is the ability to absorb anything he has touched. There's practically no limit as to what he can absorb and take the attributes of. Glass, silk, water, a whole comet at one point, steel, paper, helium, cosmic energy from a cosmic cube, electricity, gamma energy, and even Thor's hammer Mjolnir. He's grown to the size of a skyscraper and has even absorbed and controlled the mind of the Hulk. Some of this stuff doesn't even make sense, and yet he did it. He's given the Hulk, Thor, the Sentry, and even Odin a run for their money. The main thing that holds him back is he's really just not that bright. That's it. If he ever got an above average intelligence, most of the Marvel superhero community would be absolutely done for. And that's what happened in the alternate universe Earth 997 when he absorbed Ultron's intelligence and could then store different absorption abilities for later use. Cameron Hodge was Warren Worthington III's childhood friend and college roommate, and he was absolutely in love with Warren Worthington. Hodge was a publicist at an advertising firm when Angel contacted him for help starting X Factor. Hodge was the one who suggested that X Factor pose as mutant hunters, which they did thinking it would be a good cover story. But Hodge was well aware that this would increase hostility towards mutants, helped along by X Factor's national advertising campaign. He then captured and experimented on the mutant Richter in an effort to create a massive earthquake that could be blamed on mutants. He attempted to drive Cyclops insane, erasing all evidence of Cyclops' wife's existence and also creating a fake body for him to find. After Angel had his wings damaged damaged in the mutant massacre and needed to get them amputated, Hodge then attempted to wipe out Warren in an explosion, after which he produced a will that left him in charge of Worthington Industries. Warren had been saved by Apocalypse, but when he returned, Hodge then captured, experimented on, and took the life of Candy Southern, Warren's longtime girlfriend, which is when Warren relieved him of his head. But during the events of Inferno, Hodge came back after making a deal with the demon Nastir that he would be given immortality in exchange for 13 children. And his crimes only got worse and worse over time, all with the motivation of him being basically in love with Warren Worthington, and yet no one really talks or knows about him. Hugo Strange is one of Batman's best villains, and the opponent Batman calls, quote, the most dangerous man in the world. Yet, a lot of comic book fans aren't even familiar with him, which is really odd because he's been in some of the greatest Batman stories of all time and is one of Batman's oldest villains. He first appeared in Detective Comics number 36, just 9 issues after Batman's own first appearance, and he was featured in Batman number 1 when the Cape Crusader got his own monthly magazine. Some of the greatest Batman stories that feature Hugo Strange more prominently are Batman and the Monster Men, which featured Hugo Strange as a point of view character, Batman Strange Apparitions, which is a fan favorite run on Detective Comics where Strange discovers Bruce Wayne's identity and usurps it, and Batman Prey, where Strange teams up with Scarecrow and attacks Batman psychologically while working with the Gotham City Police Department's new anti-vigilante task force. He was also pretty prominently featured in the Arkham City game, which is where a lot of fans originally learned of him. 1983's New Mutants number 3 introduced the Demon Bear in the form of a dream or a nightmare, one experienced by the team's own Danny Moonstar. Now eventually it was revealed that the Demon Bear was the one behind the apparent passings of Danny's parents, and that the monster was intent on wiping out and subsequently possessing the hero to use as its own vessel on Earth. Now thankfully, Danny's teammates were able to save her from its attacks, most of all Magic, who seemingly destroyed the beast with her soul stored. In reality though, the heroes had merely returned it to its slumber until the next time it would be woken up by forces beyond their control. In the years since, the incredibly powerful Demon Bear has made a handful of appearances despite never finding a really permanent place in the wider Marvel universe. Instead, the Demon Bear has been relegated to tormenting the Native American heroes whose ancestry it shares an innate connection to. Every other appearance of this demon has proved to be life-changing to those caught in its path, but again, it's just kind of fallen to the wayside. Able to copy the knowledge, skills, and powers of every individual within a certain range of him, the mutant villain and sometimes hero known as Mimic has shown the ability to manifest a bunch of powers at the same time, and since he also absorbs knowledge, he can immediately use those copied powers with the same skill as the original owner. He is a super cool character, and over time he permanently gained the ability to use the powers of all the original X-Men. He had Angel's wings, Beast's super strength and super agility, Cyclops' optic blasts, Iceman's cryokinesis, and Jean Grey's initial limited telekinesis. He had the powers of an entire team, which makes him quite the handful when he was acting as a villain. But the fun thing is, Mimic has danced around from villain to hero, back to villain, even leading superhero teams. He has been featured in a lot of X-Men and mutant related stories, and yet for me, he always seemed like a bit of a side character. I just think he could really cause a huge amount of trouble. Over his time, he has used the powers of Professor X, Wolverine, Cable, Warpath, Sunspot, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, Colossus, Omega, X-Men, a whole bunch of others, and yet this is probably one of the first times some of you might have heard about him. A young, successful, and secretly entirely evil CEO in DC Comics, Wrath is capable of being both Batman and Bruce Wayne's #1 nemesis and antithesis, and yet almost no one cares or knows about him. Wrath first appeared back in 1984 as basically an anti-Batman, and while that may sound like lazy writing and may make you think he won't be popular, he did it before the major villain Prometheus ever even conceived of the idea. Wrath's parents were 2 burglars who were accidentally taken from this plane of existence by a young police officer who stumbled on them and thought they were robbing their own house. As you can imagine, this is quite the villain backstory to turn a young Wrath completely completely against law enforcement. He then dedicated his whole existence to going against them. Now Wrath even ended up training a young ward of his own named Elliot Caldwell, who you might have guessed became his version of Robin. Caldwell eventually takes on the role of Wrath himself, filling in his mentor's shoes, and he remained as the villain after the New 52 reboot. And yet Wrath is nowhere to be seen, and you basically never hear of him. The alien cybernetic monster Zenmu is an incredibly intelligent being with a huge amount of strength and power. Introduced in Marvel Comics in 1960's Journey into Mystery, he is one of the first monsters introduced, and he even predates the Fantastic Four. Zenmu is able to cast hypnotic rays that can control the entire human population, use telekinesis, scatter his atoms, and even inhabit host bodies. In other words, Zenmu is incredibly powerful, and yet he is almost completely absent from most of Marvel's stories. Most recently, Zenmu was a foe of the Hulk in the Immortal Hulk series, where he was completely terrifying. He was hired by the Roxxon company to ruin the Hulk's public image by creating disasters and then swooping in to save the day. Zenmu used his hypnotic powers to persuade civilians and even close friends and allies of the Hulk to turn their backs on him. Thankfully, Hulk managed to break free of his control, and he actually completely destroyed Zenmu, but I'm hoping that doesn't mean he's gone for good. And finally, when we first ever meet Mazaz, he is described as the most powerful superhero on Earth 3, the home of the sinister JLA, the Crime Syndicate of America. He was for a long time the biggest threat that the Crime Syndicate of America ever faced, and he has taken the lives of a lot of their members using his superpowers. Mazaz was Alexander Luthor and was just a regular guy until at some point in his life he figured out how to take the powers of other superpowered beings. It seems that the first person who lost their powers and their life to Alexander was Will Batson, Earth 3's Billy Batson, which gave Alexander the power of Mazaz, called down dark lightning, transforming him into a more muscular being with a superhuman strength, durability, flight, electrokinesis, and presumably magic. When he first shows up, he has already stolen the powers of a hero called Hawkwing, who we don't know, and he goes on to gain all the Kryptonian-like powers of Bizarro, plus kryptonite immunity, the Firestorm Matrix powers of Deathstorm's Earth 3's Firestorm, the super speed abilities from Johnny Quick, and more. He took on and nearly defeated the combined villains of the main universe until Lex Luthor defeated him, and that was that. Just gone and yet to return, and I kinda need more, so let's fix that.